Welcome to a special episode of the Gambling Files podcast. What makes it special is two things. One is Jon's not here. Some say rehab, but we prefer to call it a little Jon holiday, where he, loses some weight and stuff, but he's working through some things. What also makes it special is we have John Collins, who is, I had to write this down, Strategic Services Team Leader of Optimove. So we're just going to say, he is the brains of Optimove, right? It gets thrown around, lots of people in there, but realistically, it's Jon who's there making it happen and keeping the customers happy. So we are doing a second episode of our Optimove Insights. We focused on Euro 2024. So we looked at kind of group stages and a little bit of the knockout stages in the last episode. Now, post Euros, finals are over. English hearts are broken. New managers step down. Manager betting is already on the way. So, Jon, what happened? Obviously, apart from the obvious of what happened in the finals with Spain winning, what happened behind the scenes with the gambling? What went on?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks for having me back. Really appreciate the invite. And obviously, I'm devastated that Jon has taken this opportunity to swerve me.
I won't take it personally. Oh, I'm devastated he's not here. Oh, no. Oh, we'll be done in 20 minutes. It'll be great.
Yeah, he's got a lot of historic football knowledge, which was sort of straining my own.
Just don't even touch on movies or horror movies or obscure music or his Eminem story. He's got some go-to stuff in his locker that he can pull out at a hint that he can work it into a conversation. But that's why we love him.
That's great. If I'm ever at a party with him and I need to steer him away from danger, I just go straight to the sort of obscure topics, and people will naturally filter away, I'm sure.
Exactly.
But no, I mean the Euros, yeah. So obviously was a good tournament. I think all things considered, we've seen basically what we would kind of hope to see. I think pre-tournament, a number of the favourites making it through to the later rounds. I don't think we could have probably asked for a better semi-final and final than sort of France, Spain, England and Spain in terms of betting interest. And certainly, France and England were not great at this tournament, but that doesn't always translate to performance on the sportsbook. So all things were fairly well positioned there. I think there are a number of insights that we can pull out from our Pulse database, which is our benchmarking data that we collect and make available to our clients. The first one, which I think is most compelling, is probably that the actual day of the final was the biggest day of the tournament in a number of countries in terms of the number of bettors placing bets. This actually bucks a common trend that we see in these sort of tournaments where users, especially casual users that we kind of see in a World Cup and Euros, have an extreme proclivity to bet on their own national team, maybe exclusively. So in this instance, we didn't just see England, Spain, as you might expect, but all across Southern Eastern Europe, as well as Ireland, particularly in Italy, actually, we saw a massive spike on the day of the finals, which is really interesting because they obviously got knocked out a little bit earlier on in this tournament than they did in the last one, where they went all the way. So I think this is really interesting. Not only is that we're actually seeing a peak in terms of the number of bettors, but I think, we were talking about this last time. There's the importance about having a plan if your national team gets knocked out in those group stages or maybe in the round of 16. We had a few ideas that you could pivot towards. One of which was that sort of festival of football idea where you would really promote the big clashes between the favourites. And, if you went that route, that probably would have worked out for you here because we've seen a number of very, very strong performances on the days where those key matches were taking place.
Which is really interesting because I know from my days at Google, the query trends for big football tournaments were really predictable, right? So you'd have the big spike in the lead up to the opening weekend, And then as the home team, then there's spikes so we need for each country. A smaller spike then for the home team games until they get knocked out, and then another spike for the finals. But the spike for the finals would be nothing compared to, say, the opening weekend. So it's really interesting that you're saying that the number of bettors on the final was actually the kind of peak in a lot of countries.
Yeah, definitely. I think, for it obviously is going to vary from operator to operator, but on the aggregate here, we're exactly that. We were expecting the first group stage game to be the most popular, and up until the final, that probably was the case for almost every country. But we just saw a huge upswell of interest on the final. To give you an example, in Italy, there were 20% more bettors on the final than any other day.
Really?
Which is really
so look, John's the football nerd of the two of us. On this side of the table, like, was there obviously Spain were favorites? Like, was there something particular about the game, or is it just better CRM?
I don't have a good answer for you.
I wasn't
I'm afraid.
trying to lead you on that one.
I think I would like to assume it was good CRM, and people have been listening to our ideas about what to do when your team gets knocked out. But it's really interesting with Italy in particular, because our historical research shows that actually Italians don't like to bet on non-Italian teams at these tournaments. So the fact that there was so much interest. There's a couple of things I think probably did play into this one, specifically for Italy. I'm not too sure about the rest of the world, but I mean, in Italy, we are seeing a bit of a rush for product enhancements, on the online site level, as well as apps. Get to that in a little bit. But also there was kind of a bonusing war happening in the last couple of months as well in the Italian market. Not just for sports either, but for casino as well. So it's possible like it was just pure generosity driving these figures on the final here, which seems to have worked out.
As a former affiliate, I just wipe a little tear from my eye thinking about a bonus war. That's gorgeous, gorgeous. Long may it last. All right, so look, number of bettors on the day is one thing, but realistically, it's deposits that drive the business. So what was happening on the deposit side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there's two parts to this, right? Deposits and then like bet amounts. And I think the trends in both of these metrics kind of mirrors each other. So in terms of bet amount, this peaked on average per player. It peaked in the group stages and then declined over time as we went through. So although there were more players, the value of those players was less to the brand. And I think this is also the case for deposit amounts as well. So I think when we look at the deposits, we'll tend to separate either by day or like just look in like group stages versus the knockouts. And the only country we've got the data on anyway, the only country where deposit amounts exceeded the group stages was, as you might expect, in the UK, so England, more or less. And that's obvious because they're in the final. And again, another chance to kind of overturn the shadows of 50 years, 60 years now of not winning anything and losing in the finals or late knockout stages in recent tournaments. So that makes perfect sense. Everywhere else, we saw a quite not a marked decline, but definitely a step down in terms of the average deposit amount and the number of depositors through the tournament after those group stage games had happened. So what that really means is, at least in my mind, is that we're probably looking at those bets being placed later in the tournament being driven by people with active balances, so that they've already made those deposits earlier in the tournament, or bonusing, being driven by generosity. So that's quite an interesting takeaway for sure. Really underscores the value of gamification to your strategy for these big tournaments, I think.
Yeah.
I've spoken before the tournament about maybe having 2 steps to gamification, one for the group stage games where you can guarantee the national team interest, one afterwards where you don't necessarily have that anymore, but you can keep interest between the first game, the round of 16 game, and the final by sort of gating your bonusing behind bets at each stage. Now, what's another interesting stat, I think, and it's all part of the same thing here, is that the teams we took a look at the teams who made with their national team made it through to the knockout stages, and you might expect that rather like the UK that you would see some kind of consistency of the deposit amounts going through, at least on their national team games, even if they sort of didn't have that much interest elsewhere. But for pretty much every country, the day with the highest amount of deposits was actually their last group stage game, which is, again, it's kind of counterintuitive because you would thought it would be the first, but it seemed to be unusual this tournament in that a lot of those countries, especially the ones who expected to go further, were making those deposits on their last group stage game. Probably, I'm sort of speculating, theorizing here, trying to put the money in order to be able to bet on those knockout stage games once it became clear.
Could it have lined up with a payday or something, maybe like a?
In some cases, yes.
Month-end payday type thing.
Yeah, because that group stage did end around the end of the month. So you did have a little bit of 1st, 2nd July, sort of last couple of days of June, which definitely would have played into it as well. So that's definitely something to consider for the next one of these, because obviously the World Cup is fast approaching already, and all the same things will be present.
And you're already talking about the World Cup.
Well,
the poor marketing guy just sitting there.
Hey, I know a few of them who went on holiday during the Euros. So
That's confident.
That is confident.
Wow.
Very confident. So.
Wow, I love it. Okay, so. Obviously, the Euros, it's finished now. We're recording on the day of the Olympic opening ceremony. We're in a brief lull. Obviously, the Olympics isn't a big betting event because it's, what do I really know about taekwondo or skateboarding? But so you would assume then this is the natural kind of summer lull before the start of the, say, Champions League, National Leagues type scenario. Is that what you're saying, or is it like pushing on into everyone's just on holidays now and like betting and retention and stuff? Is that?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I mean, we see this historically, that your retention rates go through the floor typically after a big tournament like this, and it's not really an exception here. For the most part, we are seeing our sort of weekly retention rate drop by, in absolute terms, by about 10%, which again, very much expected. And that's even with, some events continuing after the tournament concluded that may have been quite interesting. So, I mean, we do see with a number of operators in some countries, for example, the golf majors, you see a massive upswell of people making bets. That didn't make an appreciable impact on the aggregate, I think is fair to say, with the Open that's just gone by. So, yes, what we are seeing, definitely suppressed retention rates. The exceptions being Portugal, where for some reason they're holding steady at about 63%. And then in Romania, where for some reason...
Copa?
So Copa, it basically finished around the same time, didn't it?
Yeah,
I think...
it did,
so it's we did consider that, but yeah, I think it's just a bit of a global thing that football was happening and now it's not, and now we're waiting for the next big thing.
But then it doesn't seem like a very big drop based on that, right? You know what I mean? Given it was such a European, so much football going on, it actually feels like quite a small drop. You'd think it'd be bigger.
It can be. I think. It does vary from country to country, right? So that 10% is kind of an average drop. In the UK, it's dropped by about 20. In France, it wasn't even that high to begin with, and that's gone down fairly strong as well. Same thing in Belgium. Yeah, a lot of the regions it's a larger drop than that, but then obviously we do have a few countries for whatever reason doing okay. I think Greece, very strong performance at the moment. As I said, Portugal, Romania has actually increased retention. I do not know why or how they've done that, but if anyone wants to write in and let us know, that
leave
would
it
be
in the
good.
comments.
Exactly. That would be great, because we can plan for that for all of our Romanian operators. But no, I think it's interesting, and I think there's a few points that play into this. The first one is another strategy I think that we put forward to people before the tournament was this idea of getting money in early for the resumption of the domestic leagues, because we're only 3 weeks away now from the launch of the Premier League.
Oh wow! Okay.
Which is rapid, really, in the grand scheme of how we measure retention. That might not even show up that badly when we look back on this in 6 months or a year's time, because we'll look at it at a monthly level. So it can be people putting money in early for things like the resumption of their domestic leagues. It can be things, I mentioned, sort of the Open. There was some tennis happening as well. As you mentioned, the Olympics. The Olympics is a really weird one. I've heard it sort of ideated. I think most operators are kind of skipping it strategically, as I would probably recommend. For the people who are going in on it, I think it typically tends to center around the sports that you would probably sell into a good sport user anyway. So obviously you've got tennis, which is popular in Southern Europe. That has, I would say, at least the top tier roster playing at that event. Similarly, you can see sort of ones like the golf. The golf season is effectively over now. It's just the FedEx Cup in September. So for any golf fans out there, it's literally the only sort of elevated event to bet on. So there are a couple of things in there that you could bet on. But I don't know what you think, but I kind of think of the Olympics as almost too pure an event for people to be betting on. People don't really they don't tend to think like, oh, I'll put money on the 100 meters or something. And it might just be that we don't have the personalities on the track and field these days.
It's a tricky one as well, because for the bookies, you're not allowed to say the word Olympics. You're not allowed, so you've got to talk about like sport in Paris or these kind of things. So it gets really tricky from a marketing perspective if you're not an official sponsor to talk about it. And again, I think there's so much sport back to back that with the, like, if you look at like the national broadcasters, they'll focus on their athletes that are competing. So they're jumping around between events. So there's very few like dedicated, okay, you'll get the swimming or say some of the running events where it's like, right, we're doing the 100 meters or we're doing the hurdles. So there's few marquee events. And even then, like, can you name 5 sprinters? Can you name 2 swimmers? Like, you know what I mean? Like the knowledge, the day-to-day knowledge of the athletes, I think is like, and by the end, we know all their names. We're like, I was joking with a friend, like, I'm going to be sitting there on the sofa eating chocolate, critiquing somebody's bar routine or something like that, right?
Yes.
And like, I'll be totally into it for like, or I don't know, the taekwondo was always my favorite. So I think it's walking in, you don't have a lot of knowledge, but then you've got 2 weeks of sport where you become a semi-pro in every sport. So I think it's a tough one to pre-hype.
Definitely agree, and I think I think you hit the nail on the head there with why it's a great one to skip, and it's everybody likes the Olympics for the weird sports, so like the unpopular sports, don't they? I always watch the kayaking. Like,
there's a new kayaking one where there's, I think, 5 of them, and they get dropped in together. Yeah. They've all got to navigate it's like motocross kind of thing. They've all got to navigate the course together.
Exactly. This is brilliant. I would not sit through a season long like broadcast of this, but if you want to show me it for a day,
give me a sprint. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm
there, and that's the beauty of the Olympics. And I for one am quite happy that it's not it's not something that we need to strategize overly for when thinking about retention rates, because there are other things coming.
There is, and obviously, like we've focused on a lot of European stuff. For our North American friends, the start of the NFL season is literally the only thing that matters in their lives.
Yes, indeed.
What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so probably didn't know this, but NFL is kind of one of my specialist subjects. I used to write articles on on fantasy NFL as well, because obviously pre-deregulation, DFS was the only product that you were sort of legal in the American market. Well, that wasn't a little bit underhanded anyway.
Emphasis on sort of.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, the NFL, I'm actually doing a lot of work on this at the moment, because I think I don't think we've ever gotten it right as an industry. The sort of, I know we've only had a couple of years of it at the moment, but I think there's still a lot of work around the NFL. And I think the reason for this is it starts in September, right? The first weekend is, Thursday, I guess it starts on a Thursday night, is early September. So the natural thing is to think, right, we're kind of working on it to a September thing. That's probably too late. We've been looking at some data around this recently, and there's a couple of things that are taking place in August where we start to see not the full return of the NFL better, but definitely a marked increase, like 50%, 60% increase in bettors in August. And that is college season gets underway a little bit sooner. Obviously, in some states in America, that's the premier event, actually. Yeah. The other one is, of course, the NFL preseason starts. Now, it's not very bettable, I guess, but it does create the hype around getting those preseason bets in on who's going to win the Super Bowl, that first game, who's going to win that first game, all these things. This also goes hand in hand with, if you've ever seen it, there's a docu-series that HBO releases called Hard Knocks every year. And they basically follow, it's like a behind-the-scenes locker room documentary following one of the teams. And that team, we typically see every year, people will I assume, they're not following them generally, but we definitely see a lot more popularity for that team in early bets, regardless of who it is. So last year it was New York Jets.
Are they showing the previous season? So it's a bit like a Drive to Survive kind of thing?
No. It's
or it's following it live.
It's following it live. It's like week, kind of a week before the historic.
Okay. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, and there's also I'm sure they've dropped this intentionally. There's a Netflix series called Receiver.
Yeah,
that's just dropped
I've been
as
watching
well.
That's
fun.
It's
quite good. That one and the previous one about quarterback. That is a historic look back, but it's all there to sort of serve the hype train. And yeah, I think for that reason, your window for the NFL is basically now. It's open. Communication strategy should be in place. And yeah, for that reason, I kind of think we'll see reactivation rates in August certainly be going through the roof in a number of American states. Obviously, some of them are more recently deregulated than others.
Sure.
So yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. But the thing is, America as well, it's very different from Europe, because in Europe we typically have one premier sport. And, in some countries, then you'll see a very distant second, horse racing. In others, it's like tennis or something. In America, our research is showing that there is not that big distance to the second sport in the same way as we kind of expected. Like basketball is very close to American football in popularity from bettors, at least. And that obviously has sort of a slightly different season. And then we're seeing growth in popularity of soccer, as they call it, over there as well, which will probably tap into the Premier League resumption. And then, of course, you've got the baseball season as well, which is fully underway. All of these are, I would say, not they're not negligible. There's not, in terms of the number of bettors, the people crossing between the two or three of them. There's a much more complicated picture than we see in the European sports book.
So as a marketing nerd, so I was very focused on acquisition. So it was very much like NFL dwarfed everything from an acquisition perspective. So how much of it is, but obviously you're looking at the full picture. So how much of it is like they're in for, like I always call like the start of the NFL season was just the start of gambling season, because it just, the lads are all fired up. They're salivating. They're betting on the NFL. They're in the States with casino. Your casino numbers go up and everything just gets more gambly. How much, I've invented that word, patent pending.
It makes sense, yeah.
It's gamblify. But how much of it then is like just those guys betting on NFL and betting on baseball and betting on basketball and hockey and just, you know, gambling all around them versus distinct acquisition sources?
No, I think you're right. I think the NFL is the sort of the gateway product, if you like, to the gambling or the sports book in the US. But it certainly seems like cross sell for lack of a better term, like an internal sports cross sell or upsell if you prefer. It's very much more possible in the US than it is in Europe. And I think that's something that people really need to lean into, because we've spoken to some people who are like, we don't care about anything except the NFL. And the numbers don't really bear that out.
Because it's a good point, because you could imagine an NFL, your average NFL bettor will also have a strong opinion and a bet on, say, basketball. But your average football punter in the UK won't be that interested in golf or tennis, which are both two huge sports from a betting perspective. But the cross sport, I see what you mean, like that cross sport interest or that cross sport knowledge of, I've got a football team, I've got a baseball team, I've got a basketball team, I've got a hockey team, and I'd keep an eye on all four of them, but my preference would be, say, football first. Okay, exactly. That makes it. That's a really interesting insight. I like that. Yeah,
and you have to remember as well, like, I mean, in certain markets in Europe, there are occasions where you do have other opportunities to acquire people through other sports, like the Grand National, Cheltenham Festival in the UK, for example, great examples of how to get people into horse racing. In fact, they're the only times that new people join the horse racing betting pool.
But they don't even want the Grand National customers.
Yeah, basically, like, it's just those two. Yeah. But I mean, over in the States, you have like a number of like mini highlight events for these other sports. March Madness, obviously for basketball. That's not even like the pro game. You've got Stanley Cup, the World Series. There's a number of these mini highlight events that appeal to I guess the more casual bettors, like a Euros does, in a way that maybe we just don't have in other sports in Europe.
Just on the college basketball, obviously with the women's college basketball seems to be taking with Caitlin and some of these players kind of coming through. They've gone through onto WNBA. Are you seeing more on, like, is it from a low base? Are you seeing stuff on women's basketball, or it's still it's more media hype than betting hype?
So I don't have the hard numbers in front of me, but I know that my CEO Pinny is a huge basketball fan and has been looking into this. I believe there is some movement happening, and it's very personality driven.
Sure.
Through the Caitlin Clark effect. There is some interest here. I do think a lot of it is somewhat artificial. I don't think you're going to get the organic traffic. It's sort of similar to how you see with like the women's Euros and World Cup. Like there is a lot of like effort, I think, to popularize it, and for good reason. It's a good product, but it doesn't necessarily translate into sporting punters wanting to place bets.
Got it.
We will see some movement there. It will be really interesting to see how sustainable that is. As you know, I'm not super familiar with the makeup of the women's NBA league, but my understanding is it's quite a small group of teams that just play each other a lot, rather than the sort of like, you're playing like 19 teams twice, and every occasion is like a very different thing. They'll play the same sort of 5 or 6 teams like 7 or 8 times.
Got it. So it's probably one of those, like the increased media exposure encourages more owners to set up teams or buy into teams, and so that kind of franchise modeling, so it's probably the start of a longer process.
Very
over
much
many
so.
years kind of thing. Okay.
Very much so. But I mean, it's a very interesting topic because I think, like your sports punter is typically male. So, there is a slightly untapped source of acquisition, certainly with female bettors, and typically I think we see higher engagement rates through the casino side of things rather than through sports alone. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the growth of women's sports translates to performance on the sportsbook.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. The other one I was thinking about was you touched on earlier on. You were talking about mobile apps, and so like and there's obviously in play versus pre-game and all. What was those kind of just top line kind of demographics type stuff?
Yeah, so we were expecting from our wagering intentions survey that we put out before the competition, we were expecting around 80% of people to be betting through their mobile apps. In the actual numbers, it was actually higher than that. So almost every country was north of 85%, and quite a few were over 90% in terms of mobile. So if your mobile product is not top tier at this point, then you're not really competing with the casual bettor. I think, you might. I honestly, we've not done enough looking at the sort of the whales on each operator to say if they prefer to sit in front of a laptop or something for their betting. Certainly, I think for some products like poker, that probably does make more sense. But for the casual sport punter, yeah, it's mobile and not much else.
It's just fucking turn off the desktop at this point, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah. I wonder how much money you could save, like development
you
time.
think all the development, like the development in UX, and we'll tweak this and we'll change this, but if we're just taking all that resource and just sticking it onto your mobile.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, actually. I don't know, just to sort of change tack very slightly here, but it's still mobile focused. Have you ever heard of Venmo? It's like a payment service in the UK. Yeah. So Venmo does not have a desktop solution, right? It's pure mobile app aimed at like peer-to-peer money saying. And
there's a bunch of UK investment platforms that do the same thing. Yeah. Just like there's no desktop, just you have to download the app. And that's it.
Exactly. So I think with the financial platforms heading that way, how long until we see pure mobile?
One of on the investment stuff, some of the feedback I've seen from users is older people complaining because they've got bad eyesight and it's hard to see the phone. They want to see it on a bigger screen. So it's purely like an age thing.
That doesn't surprise me, to be honest with you, especially as we're talking about things like horse racing, where your average age is about 60 now.
Average age is dead.
Well, exactly. So we'll have to have the have a desktop platform for horse racing, and then for the Euros, you get your own mobile app because 90% of people are betting through that. And then turning to live figures. So again, we. Under normal business conditions, the domestic leagues are in full swing, Champions League, all this. We see really high live rates, sort of up to about 80% in some cases. For the Euros, quite surprisingly, it was actually down on that. So we were seeing most countries, it was around 50 to 60% of bets were placed live. Mm-hmm. In the UK and Ireland, this was really far down. Actually, it was all the way down to around 30%. That did go up when England were not playing, which is like quite an interesting data point because it's like 30% when they are, 40% when they're not. And that sort of suggests to me that the more casual, like the most casual cohort of bettors here are placing their bet, putting their phone away, and then just watching the game. Which it's an interesting phenomenon.
There's nothing wrong with that, right? I'm in the pub, I'm having a beer, I'm with the lads.
Exactly, it's quite wholesome, isn't it?
Oh, that's sweet.
Exactly. I was very, very surprised to see that, and it'd be interesting to see how that kind of thing bears out across other events, because like as I said beforehand, we were expecting those figures to be significantly higher. So
could it also be fatigue as well? Because there was a lot of games, a lot of good games, and there's only so much in play you can do. Like, you're basically live trading the game, right? So
quite, yeah.
Is it a case of just like, fuck it, I'll just do a tenner on this one? And
yeah, I think fatigue for sure probably does play a certain factor here. Obviously, as you mentioned, if you are Spanish or English, or as I mentioned earlier, Italy, like there was, you use 5 or 6 betting games just on the national team. Then you've got other big games that are happening as well. So there were, and this is a very short space of time, so it could be definitely fatigue. Could just be obviously, very, very driven by people redeeming or like, zeroing out balances that they've got left over from earlier in the tournament. And of course, the other sort of idea that we've got around this might be that it's to do with product. It's to do with the generosity strategies that people have got. If you're placing bets on something and you've got an odds boost on picking the winner pre-game, probably you're going to be putting your money pre-game. So I think it's probably a combination of those. But it's a very, very interesting phenomenon.
Really interesting. Fantastic. So it was a good tournament. Everything went well. Numbers are up. All seems like a super positive. And then it's straight back into the sportsbook grind of Premier League in a few weeks, and start your NFL yesterday, and Champions League's around the corner.
Basically, yeah. I think people could take a couple of weeks off to try and enjoy the taekwondo at the Olympics. But yes, it's going to be. I think we typically do see a slow start with the Premier League and the sort of early starting leagues. You may, if you're in Germany and you're the Bundesliga is the end of August, right? So you've got a little bit more time to build your strategy and sort of recreate that hype. But yeah, for a lot of people, it's going to be very much like straight on to the next thing. And the plans for that have obviously been in the works for quite some time.
For sure. It won't be a surprise. Wonderful, Jon. Thank you so much. So this is Jon from Optimove. Click the link below, book the demo. Get access to brainiacs like Jon, all the data and the insights, and big thank you to Optimove, iGaming industry's #1 CRM platform. Thank you very much, Jon.
Thank you very much for having me.